In March of 1922, on a remote farm in southern Germany, something went terribly wrong. The place was called Hinterkaifeck, an isolated homestead surrounded by forest, far from neighbors, far from help. In the days before the crime, the owner of the farm noticed strange footprints in the snow. They led toward the house, but never away from it. Tools began to disappear. Unexplained noises came from the attic at night, yet no one left the farm. On the night of March 31st, 6 people were murdered, quietly, methodically, one by one. What makes this case especially disturbing is what happened next. Evidence suggests the killer stayed on the farm for days after the murders. The animals were fed, meals were prepared, smoke continued to rise from the chimney. To the outside world, life at Hinterkaifeck appeared normal. It was not. More than 100 years later, no one knows who committed the crime or why. This is Germany's most haunting, unsolved case. This is the Hinterkaifeck murders.
The Hinterkaifeck murders, a silence that never ended. In the early 1920s, rural Germany was a place of isolation. Small farms stood alone among forests and fields, connected to the outside world by dirt roads and routine habits. One such place was a remote farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck. Few people had reason to visit it. Fewer still would ever forget its name. The Gruber family lived there in near total seclusion. Andreas Gruber, the head of the household, was an aging farmer described by neighbors as stern, suspicious, and deeply private. He lived with his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's 2 young children. The family worked the land, cared for their animals, and rarely socialized beyond necessity. But behind the quiet routine, something was already wrong. Months before the murders, the household had experienced unexplained disturbances. The previous maid left her job abruptly, telling others that she believed the farm was haunted. She spoke of footsteps in the attic, of strange presences at night. Her claims were dismissed as superstition, yet the vacancy she left would soon be filled by someone who would never leave alive. In the days leading up to March 31st, 1922, Andreas Gruber noticed something that unsettled even him. After a snowfall, he saw footprints leading from the forest to the farm. There were no tracks returning the other way. Someone had come to Hinterkaifeck and never visibly left. Soon after, tools began to disappear. A key went missing. Strange noises echoed from above the living quarters, as if someone were moving in the attic. Andreas searched the farm, but found nothing. Despite growing unease, no one contacted authorities. In rural Germany at the time, families relied on themselves, even when fear took hold. On March 31st, a new maid arrived at the farm. It was her first day. By the next morning, she would be dead. Sometime during the night, the killer began their work. Investigators later believed that members of the family were lured into the barn one by one. There were no signs of a struggle that would suggest panic or resistance. The attacker waited, patient, silent. Each victim was killed with the same brutal method. The order remains uncertain, but the result was absolute. Inside the house, the maid and the youngest child were killed as well. No one was spared. What makes the Hinterkaifeck murders especially disturbing is not only the violence, but what followed. Evidence clearly indicated that the killer stayed on the farm for days after the murders. The animals were fed, food was prepared and eaten, fires were lit to keep the house warm, smoke continued to rise from the chimney, signaling life to anyone passing by. To the outside world, Hinterkaifeck appeared normal. it was anything but. When neighbors finally became concerned after days of silence and unattended mail, they went to investigate. What they found was a nightmare frozen in time. The bodies were discovered in the barn and inside the house. In shock and confusion, villagers walked freely through the property, unintentionally destroying crucial evidence before police arrived. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in Bavarian history. Authorities questioned hundreds of people, neighbors, former workers, traveling laborers, even family members and acquaintances were scrutinized. Some believed the crime was personal, others suspected robbery, though nothing of value had been taken. There were theories involving jealousy, inheritance, and long-buried family secrets. One particularly chilling possibility emerged, the idea that the killer knew the farm intimately, its routines, its layout, its vulnerabilities. The lack of forced entry suggested trust or familiarity. The attic noises and missing tools raised a darker thought that someone may have been hiding on the property long before the murders, watching the family, waiting. Despite years of effort, the case collapsed under its own complexity. Forensic science at the time was limited, evidence was contaminated, witness statements conflicted, suspects came and went, but none could be definitively linked to the crime. Eventually, the investigation slowed, then it stopped. The farm itself did not survive the decades. Hinterkaifeck was demolished, its buildings erased, the land reclaimed by nature. Today, nothing remains but a small memorial and questions that refuse to fade. Who walked out of the forest that winter night? Why did the killer stay after the murders? And how could someone commit such a crime and disappear completely? More than 100 years later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved, not because they were forgotten, but because silence won. And in that silence, the mystery still lives.